Hello, friends, and welcome back to Book Banter. Glynis Peters, a retired NHS nurse, is a British author who writes historical World War II novels with a mystery, suspense, and romantic twist. She lives by the sea in Essex with her husband of 40-plus years. They have 3 adult children and 4 grandchildren. Let's welcome Glynis to Book Banter. Hello!
Hello, Canada.
So it's 11 o'clock here, but where you are, it's around 7 o'clock. Is that right?
It's 7 in the evening, yes.
In the evening. So I would have tea. You may have a special beverage. It is Friday.
Not quite. When I finished.
That's true.
You wouldn't understand me if I had a gin and tonic at my side.
Gin and tonic is a very British thing, isn't it?
Yes, it became quite a hit. It used to be frowned upon. Mother's ruin, they used to call it, didn't they?
Mother's ruin. That's cute. Or savior, depending on
which way you savior.
So first of all, congratulations on your most recent appearance on the Globe and Mail bestseller list for the Red Cross Orphans.
No, I know. What a wonderful surprise and start to 2022. I couldn't believe it. Wonderful.
It's a good thing. It's a very good thing. We love to read here because it's cold.
Well, yes. I'm sure.
Some years colder than others. This year we've had snow, and this morning even it's frost. It's like the sun finally came out, the fog lifted, but the frost is still lining all of the rooftops. So
yes, we've got frost at the moment. We've got a very, very chill down night, I think, tonight. No snow.
No snow? No. Do you usually get snow?
We do get snow. Where I live is by the sea, so we tend not to get a lot. If we get a lot, the rest of the country's in trouble.
That's a good indicator. And a little dusting is kind of pretty around the holidays, but you know, if you got to dig out, it's a different story. So, so I'm always curious when I read an author's bio, and your bio tells us that you were an NHS nurse. For those of you living outside of the UK, NHS stands for National Health Services, which is the countrywide health system in England. I had to look that up because I didn't know what it stood for. And I didn't realize you were a nurse. I'm curious about how your years of experience in the healthcare system made their way into the Red Cross Orphans.
My experience would have been completely different to a Red Cross nurse in World War II. But the emotions of being a nurse and losing patients or having to deal with something completely catastrophic, they are what I used and I fell back on for this series.
That makes sense because it's the human emotion is regardless of what era or circumstance, it kind of runs through the common thread in a story. So that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. That intrigues me because I find oftentimes that like most authors have like a life before they were authors because they dreamed of writing, but you know, until you have life experience, it's difficult to actually write a story that is compelling and that people want to read. So, but our skills that we've learned and have mastered before, we tend to take for granted. So when we can lean into them and bring them into our stories like you have with the emotions, that makes a big difference. It helps our create the empathy and the clarity to our stories and our characters' journeys. So using that sort of nursing background, those emotions of what people may have gone through, will you continue to pull that forward in future novels?
Yes, I first really used it fully in The Forgotten Orphan, the book prior to this. Yeah. Where nursing's featured, which triggered the idea for the Red Cross nurses. But I went very deep with the emotions there. And it was a tough emotional write, because it triggered in me some very black days during my nursing time, of patients that I'd sat beside during the dark nights, and then eventually they left us. And I was 19 when I started nursing, and I went right back to my very first loss of a patient, just to dig deep for my character, for my character to understand what it feels like to lose a patient, because I have to portray that to the character, and the character has to portray that to the reader.
Absolutely.
So
That takes a lot of courage.
I had to really pull inside me, and it hurts sometimes when as a nurse, you get fond of patients sometimes, some of them.
Of course.
And yeah. And it was tough at times.
I kind of find writing a bit cathartic that way. It kind of allows us to process things that were traumatic or emotions that were difficult to deal with. And at the time, we're really good as humans to just stuff them all down and hope they don't surface. But so often they do. And as an author, you can choose to let them surface. And it serves such a great purpose, because it not only helps heal your experience, but it provides insight to readers who literally can put the character on like they're putting on a coat and feel that without having had to live it. That's huge.
I like to try and think that I can do that. I absolutely love books that make me feel as if I've got the shoes of the character on my feet and walking the walk. And I really do try. I love it when I get an email or a message saying, I thought I was your character.
I love that. I think if readers identify, you've done your job. You've made them feel, you've taken them on that roller coaster of emotions that is life.
It always worries me. I mean, some of the reviews that come up through NetGalley or Amazon is, I cried my way through this book, or Glynis Peters made me cry. Well, I didn't want to make you cry. Sorry,
that's like my goal.
It is now, but at first I was like, oh dear.
I'm always like, oh good, they got it, they felt it, they were immersed.
It's one of the biggest compliments.
It really is.
Yeah,
it really
and
is.
those that don't feel it and say, oh, I didn't get anything from this, then that's fine, because we've all got different paths of emotions to walk. So,
and it depends on where you are in your life. Like sometimes different stages of life just don't bring with them, or don't afford the luxury of different emotions. It's, if you're just trying to keep your head above water, you're reading light, fluffy stuff. You're not going deep into other things. Whereas if you're in a more stable, emotionally stable place in your life where, not that things are easier, it's just they're in a different place, you can sort of test the waters with more challenging emotional reads.
That's right.
We should rate books.
I must say, sorry?
We should rate books like they rate movies, like PG for emotional content.
Yes. I mean, quite often the readers will put out this warning: you will need a box of tissues, but, and I think, oh,
that's one
so
thing.
Maybe it should be how many tissue boxes.
Yes, that's a great idea. How many tissues will you need? We should have invested in Kleenex before we started writing.
That's right. We should have done. Yes, we dropped a few names.
So true. I really like emotional books. I want to walk that experience. I want to feel it. But it's, it's also good to have a break and have something lighter in between and stuff. But yeah, that's always been my goal.
I tend to read crime whilst I'm writing, because I'm not distracted, and I do not get confused then as to whose words I'm using on the page.
Isn't that true?
Yeah. And then when I'm done and I'm emotionally drained, I tend to read more light-hearted types, but I love the community spirit. Christy Barlow, she's written a fantastic community in her books in Love Heart Lane, and it's a little village in Scotland that she's invented, but it's now become a real world. And it's incredible. And I live in that village when I come out of my own world, with bombed down buildings and everything. Yes, I like to go and walk around the lovely fields of Scotland in Love Heart Lane.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I'm thrilled because the books are coming to the end in her series. I think there's 13, 14, and I think 13 and 14 are due out. But she's got some more to come.
You have to reread, start at the beginning. And
I know. Fortunately, she is a friend of mine, so I can just keep going. I say, you need some more.
We're not done yet because I'm not done reading.
No, I send a little text every now and then because I think of somebody else who could move into the village and take something. She must get fed up of me, but I'm just so, please don't stop my little world.
Collaborative. That's the best way. I'm gonna write her. What was the author's name again? Christy
Barlow. You'll find her connected to me quite a bit. She's a One More Chapter author.
Okay.
But it's Love Heart Lane is the series, and it really is a delight. It's everybody starts connecting with everybody, and it moves through all these different lives, and it's lovely. And my other friend Deborah Carr, she writes. Yes, I mean, she's just become a USA Today bestseller with her An Island at War. But you see, she writes World War II, World War I. I read those, I adore them, but not straight away after my work.
It's interesting, isn't it? You need to cleanse the palate.
Yes. And then I'm ready to read hers. And they're my go-to at times.
It's interesting. I love hearing what everybody reads as authors because it's such an important part of our writing process is reading. And I do the same thing that you do with crime and psychological thriller type reading. I read that while I'm editing. And I think I do it because of pacing. And it's different enough to step aside from historical, but it gives me that nudge in terms of keeping the pacing going. And now that you say that that's what you do, I can see it in your novels. So that's really good. I love that. Because I can see because there's never a dull point. There's never a point where I go, okay, how many, I know when I'm reading a book, if I have to flip and see how many pages are left in a chapter, that something has fallen off for me. As a reader. So, and I never do that with yours. I'm always like, oh,
thank you.
It's 11:30 at night, but that's okay. Just one more chapter. Every time.
Yes, I've often been made to feel guilty when I read a review and it says it's 3 o'clock in the morning, or it was 3 o'clock in the morning. So I could not sleep, so I got up and started reading. I'm like, oh dear.
It's so funny. Actually, I think
there's the other side of me thinking, are they reading my book so that they can fall asleep? And then it starts to worry me.
Well, I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't ask that question. I think it's Simon & Schuster's email that I get that they actually send an email late at night that says can't sleep. and then they list.
Oh, that's a good one.
Isn't that great? And then I see, of course, I'm not reading my email at that time of night, but I see it in the morning and I go, "Ooh, look at that. Now there's a good one to keep you up all night." So
Yeah. Yeah.
totally. I get it. Yeah, I'm guilty of crawling back into bed the next morning after everybody's on their way and finishing the book. I did
Finishing
that
the
this
book.
week,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. If you don't
Yeah.
want to sleep, just read a Stephen King, you know what I mean?
Oh, you won't sleep for weeks.
It's a few years since I've touched one, so
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's so funny. So, having met you while you were visiting in
Yes.
Canada, I understand the Canadian connection with your stories, but readers may not. So, we all love a little behind the scenes peek into why authors do what they do. So, can you tell us a little bit about why you insert a Canadian hero into your novels?
Because my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandson and my little granddaughter all live in Lynn Valley in
Yeah,
BC,
which
North
is
Vancouver.
Vancouver, British Columbia for those outside of
Yes,
Canada.
sorry. Yeah.
But it is, and so there's always that tug.
Yes. The reason, I mean, my grandson was born 5 days before my 60th birthday, and we'd flown out to celebrate the 60th birthday. And we'd hoped that we were going to be holding a grandchild, but he held on and we did get to hold him. He came the day after we landed.
Oh,
So yes, it was wonderful, wonderful. So I'm not saying it was wonderful to see my daughter-in-law in pain and my
no.
son panicking, but it was nice to actually be able to be there for them with something
Oh,
at the
absolutely.
time.
Absolutely.
Distance can take some things away from you, as
It
COVID
does.
has proven.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
But when my grandson was born, obviously we were on a high. I mean, and we went. My husband and I went down town and to buy a few little things, and there was a young. It was Remembrance, and there was a young man in RAF uniform, and
Oh,
it threw me a little bit. It threw me a little bit. He'd got his poppies, and I thought, oh gosh, you're a very handsome young man. First off, your mother must be very proud of you. And I thought, my goodness, of course, Canada was connected with
yes.
World War II. Silly me. I mean, we were taught about the Americans. You hear
Right.
all about the Americans coming over, and I didn't. And I knew obviously Commonwealth countries helped, but I hadn't really made that connection with Canada. So the curious in me and the writer in me had to do a little bit more digging, and that was it. I'd been offered the contract to write
Oh,
with one more chapter to a title, The Secret Orphan, because they'd got no one that they didn't know what to do with the title, and that was it. That was it. I've
that
got to have a Canadian hero. I've got to have something for my grandson that
aw,
Mimo is part of his world as well. And
absolutely.
that, so every book of mine now has a Canadian hero.
I love it personally, but I'm
You
probably
do.
biased, but but I love it. It's a nice flavor because we're so closely linked geographically to the United States. There's Canada kind of just steps back a lot and is overshadowed by news and events and goings on in the US. So it's always nice to have a little piece of Canada somewhere else. And a few years ago, and I don't remember what the campaign was for, to be honest, but there was a campaign going on media, and the slogan was, the world needs a little more Canada." So you're doing your part.
I'm trying. I must admit, I was surprised at the reception from Canada. I was waiting to hear that I'd got things badly wrong, and that I'd offended a few people. My inbox tells me so many different stories to that completely. I mean, it's incredible the way I've been received. And yeah, and with the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star placements, and then I was in an article, a Canadian article, where they were writing about Margaret Atwood and myself, and the connection now that is there for me. I feel I've made that connection. And my son was, I went to go and get such and such, and look what I found, and look what I saw, and so that was lovely. And then when I made it into the Canadian Hello magazine with the Forgotten Orphan, 2-page spread.
Nice.
And the royal family on the front cover made me feel very, yes.
I have arrived.
Yes. So now I feel comfortable with writing my Canadian heroes. Yeah, just a warning, I have introduced an American into the series as well now. So I feel the balance is right now. I can
globally open.
Yes.
Which, the world is global now with connections. I mean, even us right now, we're in 2 different continents around the world, and different time zones and everything like that. And yet we're all connected. So I think that books can be as well. And I think that readers like that. They do.
I think so too. Yeah.
It's nice to read a little bit of history also from other people's perspectives. I think that sheds a light on where we sit as well, and how we feel about our history as well, because everybody's got Mars on their history. I mean, there's not a place existing, if there was humans on it, there's got a black mark somewhere. So sadly.
Right.
So I recently finished the Red Cross Orphans, and I really did enjoy it. I am always a sucker for your type of story, that little hit of mystery and intrigue, the threat of the dangers associated with the war, though it's very immersive, I find. And then that love story just kind of balances it out. It's lovely. But you have this knack for Red Cross Orphans, but also your other titles with your scenery. It's a very impactful element to the story. And I'm always drawn in by the locales. And I'm always like, okay, get me that plane ticket. I am going there now because I want to see this view that these characters are looking at. So it lends such a familiarity to the characters' destinations. They feel very real. And I'm wondering, do you do a lot of traveling before you write, or are you pulling from somewhere else?
Well, with the Red Cross Orphans, the street that I described, where Kitty comes from, I was brought up there until I was 8 years old.
Oh, that's why it's so poignant.
The village, the village is actually my grandparents' and my mother's village, and it's just down the road from here. So, I'm back to my birth town. So this is where you have the promenade, and where she goes back home, where she lives with her aunt and uncle. Now, Scotland, where she goes to, is where we spent I have never been to the place mentioned in the book, but it is in my mind. We had our 40th, our Ruby wedding anniversary, just in the June before COVID hit. In Scotland. Cornwall, we'd visited the year before, and that is where my family on my father's side originated from.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of, I'd already been there and seen that with The Secret Orphan.
Mm-hmm.
So I drew on that again. Birmingham, I went to as a child. So and Coventry, where I wrote The Secret Orphan and The Orphan Thief, I've never been. But
Oh,
that is
really?
purely, that's purely because I drew on research online because I wanted World War II.
Mm-hmm.
I did not want modern world. I don't want the modern world. So anything that is very cynic and she looks out to sea or looks at something, I've been there. But in Coventry, I was supposed to go, but obviously with lockdown, it hasn't happened and it will happen. I will go. But it was purely, I did not want to see the new cathedral, but I do want to go and see the remainder of the Blitz part. And Coventry here was hit as badly as London.
Yeah.
And as you know, in my books, I focus on the blitzed towns and cities, not London.
Yeah.
Because everybody writes about that a lot better than me, and everybody references it. In fact, it was quite interesting because somebody, I don't know if it was a Canadian reader or an American reader, actually commented on a review that the book was set in Coventry, London. Because it was Blitz, they assumed that it was London.
London. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Interesting. So, and that's one of the things that I really like is learning about the other places through World War II that were affected because so much of the focus goes to London.
Yes.
And that's, I think it was The Secret Orphan that was very impactful for me, that I was just, I wanted to know more. Like it was just, there was so much emotion in that novel that, and I was surprised. I was surprised by the history. So that was good.
Yes.
That was really good. Not that good that
book,
it happened, but.
no, that book was triggered because I'd read a poem called The Coventry Rose.
Oh.
And The Coventry Rose really got across the traumas of the Blitz and the war and what have you. And of course, the child in The Secret Orphan is called Rose.
Yeah.
And she just came to me in this poem and said, "Hello, hello."
Knock,
That's
I'm
where
here.
The story went. Yes, I need my story written, and yeah,
yes.
it just took me off. And then and in that one, I had the Canadian hero, the pilot, and then I had the Canadian photographer.
Yep.
Because in the second book, the Orphan Thief, because in that one, I'd learned a lot more as well about what my thoughts were. What if I was 16 and you came home? I'd been told about an aunt of a lady who was who came home to nothing, and that's how that book opens, and there's nothing there. And I thought, what would I have done at that age? And I thought, my goodness me. And then I saw something about some photographers, and then of course I came across a Canadian photographer and a female wartime photographer as well, which I didn't use, obviously. But yeah, and it was all very interesting. I thought, that's it. That's my hero. I've got to have. Then I had the paratrooper, and now the Doctor.
It's interesting because that that opening scene was very impactful. Like it's the world is not perfect right now, and it's like you got that gut-wrenching bit out at the beginning.
yeah, that I think that's going to take a little while for readers to accept that it happened. There were a couple of reviews, it was a little bit far-fetched. Well, actually, no, it's the truth. It's fact. It happened.
The thing about fiction is that fact is actually almost harder to believe than fiction. And, I've had a similar comment about there's no way that happened. I'm like, really? Just Google it.
Yeah.
Google is your friend.
I had a comment. There was one where it was where one of the characters, it was the epilogue where she went on to get married, but she'd already had 2 or 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
And that would never have happened, and what have you. Well, actually, I know for a fact that it did. That's all I'm saying. Not to me. I'm not that old, but these children were born out of wedlock, because of red tape, trying to get the eventual wife to the right country to be with her husband.
Absolutely.
Post-war. So in 1940, children were born out of wedlock, and they did go on to marry after children.
Yep.
But that just seemed something that people had. They weren't all goody two shoes in the 1940s. Believe me, some of the stories that I
Human nature came in.
I can't put that in there.
That's it. It's always interesting. We haven't, like, as humans, we really haven't changed that much. Our needs and wants are still pretty similar through history.
Yes.
All one has to do is look back at photos of the Spanish flu and see that there were anti-mask protests during the Spanish flu.
Yeah,
over 100 years ago. So we haven't evolved.
The world has to be 50-50 split. So
it's
to make it interesting.
It does, right? That's exactly. It gives us more to write about.
It does. It does.
More fodder. So, I'm not familiar with how the Red Cross contingent versus like the military and the troops differed during the war. Like, did they have different hospitals or facilities, or was it just staffing? Like, I don't know how that all worked.
In some places, yes, where you had your RAF units, they had their own nursing teams. The Army had their own, and the Navy had their own. And with me, with the Red Cross, I heard a few little stories that I'd been told, and some of the girls were nomadic, which is what caught my interest.
Okay.
And they went from hospital to hospital where the need was. So those and the auxiliaries and the volunteers, they went to help where the backlog became too much with the bombings, especially.
The Red Cross was, or the Red Cross was more like the mobile unit then, where they would go where needed?
Not necessarily. No, they had their own units, their own hospitals as well. And in World War I, they took over the manor houses and things like that. Downton
Abbey.
And yes, Downton Abbey. So yes, they did that. And in World War II, some of those were released back.
Okay.
And some people gave up their homes. Some were the Army or would sort of turn up on the doorstep and say, "You've got enough rooms for all our men we're in."
Okay.
So they commandeered buildings.
They just
took over. And then this is now going to be X, Y, and Z. And then when they had no need for it, or the things were left behind or still there, sometimes the Red Cross could move in, help and support. So
gotcha.
Or take it over and look after. They looked after an awful lot of people.
I bet.
They didn't just there wasn't just nursing involved.
Okay.
There was a lot more going on.
Interesting. Interesting. I don't know I know the history, so to speak, of the Red Cross, but how it actually mobilizes and works, I don't have a lot of knowledge on. So that's interesting how they blended in and stood alone and yet blended in. Like it's a...
That's right. They were incredible. The Canadian Red Cross ensured that the British people had parcels. The British Red Cross ensured that the POWs were supported and our own men were supported. It had a knock-on effect all the way around. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant what they do or did and do.
Find a need and fill it. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is only last week, or a few days ago, I had a new reader contact me with the most beautiful email. She was very complimentary, a historian and an English teacher, but she's German.
Okay.
And she spoke very highly of my Red Cross book, but she came across when she sadly lost her parents, she came across her mother's diary of when she was a Red Cross nurse in Germany during the war.
Really?
And she said, yes, and she said that it actually, my book, it explained to her why her mother was so nomadic in Germany.
Isn't that
so? My character Kitty Patterson is a parallel of her mother, and I was just so touched by her contacting me and telling me. And yes, and it then made me realize, well, actually, they were going through the same. And like she said, not all Germans were Nazis, which I obviously know. I've got family who are Germans, so I do know that side of it. But it was just so heartwarming for me to realize that I'd actually touched on something in my book that I knew was correct, but she'd validated it in Germany. And it's fantastic. And she said, I'd like to write my mother's story and diary up. And I'm like, yes, do
that. Please do that. We'd like to read it.
Yes.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yes.
And I like how it helped close the loop for somebody as well to gain that understanding. Yes. That's a huge compliment.
It is. It really, really made my day. It was lovely. Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice. So nice.
I know. I was as touched. I must admit.
Those are the best emails.
Yeah, my publisher was delighted.
I bet.
Delighted.
Because that's one of those moments where you go, somebody got it. They understood. Yes. And that's,
and it was real.
But when they really deeply get it.
Because when you think of a nurse, you think of them working inside a hospital.
Yes.
For a long period of time. Whereas my character didn't, you see. And her mother didn't. And she was a Red Cross nurse. So it was just one of those moments in my life that I was like, oh.
That everything intersects and it makes sense. I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I have to say when I was reading, I made some notes because I found some of the research to be really fascinating, and things that I hadn't even thought of. And it's kind of like you don't know what you don't know until somebody points it out to you. And one of the things that struck me was the number of injured factory workers. And I remember thinking how it hadn't occurred to me, and yet now it makes perfect sense, but it hadn't occurred to me how that inexperience on the home front could be such a life-altering occurrence for so many. And I'm wondering if there was some piece of information that you went through in your research that stuck out and you went, that's something that nobody's mentioned.
I don't know if it was so much that nobody has mentioned it, but it flagged up to me the Canary Girls, the ammunition workers. They're called the Canary Girls because their skin turned yellow because of working with the powders and etc. to make the weapons. And you know, very sadly, their lives, their lives were lost. One small movement by an inexperienced person, and life is in danger. The arms and legs lost in factories as well by inexperienced workers on heavy machinery. That also, and that added to the workload, obviously, of the hospitals.
Absolutely.
And that stood out for me. I suddenly thought, oh my goodness me, yes, of course, obviously, you know, one minute you're at home baking a cake, and the next minute you're there lifting sort of the equivalent of a V1 and a V2, or a Spitfire, you know, putting Spitfire together. Well, they were capable women, but they had to learn how to do it first, or men and women, obviously, men and women. People were making cars, and the next minute, especially in Coventry, after Coventry was blitzed, the car manufacturers, they weren't going to be torn apart by this. So behind the scenes, they decided we've got to build more planes, parts for planes, parts for tanks, etc., etc., etc. So they worked double shifts, they worked longer hours, the workload became heavier and heavier and more dangerous.
Absolutely. It's interesting how they pivoted, though. Like there was a lot of pivoting going on and outside the box thinking. And it may seem like if you were living it, it might have seemed slow, but really for the time period and the speed with which communication traveled and that, it actually happened fairly quickly.
That's right. If you think, you know, the telephone lines for a start weren't 100%. If you needed to, everything was a telegraph, a telegram. And telegraph, a few words had to you know, send a novel. But they got it done. I mean, you know, potholes in the roads and vehicles that could only do certain miles an hour, fuel shortage. But they got there. They got the word out. Incredible times, really.
It's quite amazing. Like it's a real show of human resilience, and it's.
I'm very proud of my ancestors and my family that fought and worked through the war. My grandfather was Home Guard. On my mother's side, my maternal. And my paternal grandfather, he was on the Russian front.
Wow.
He was in the Navy. He never spoke about it. It's and being I was post-war, 1957 born, so you have nobody would talk about the war. So
you have before and you have after, and that's
it's a bit like with COVID, where everybody's waiting to no longer have to talk about it anymore, to get out in the world again and start life again. And we've got that battle of ours going on, and they had their own. And there are people traumatized by what our present day. And,
for sure.
You know, they've got to go through those horrors.
Absolutely. Well, lives have been
and come out the other side. That's right. So I was a post-war child, where people, you know, nobody spoke about it. So I didn't learn anything about it until later on in life, much later on in life. And what I did find out, I was like, whoa. So,
isn't that amazing? It changes the way you view things too. The more you you learn and immerse yourself in an experience, and you walk away. I think that's what World War II novels are really good for, is giving us a lens through which to look, so that our appreciation of where we are and the freedoms that we have can really be acknowledged properly. So I think that's why
that's right. Yeah, I mean, yes, we're going through the horrors of COVID, but nobody's handed anybody a gun yet and told them to go. It's watch TV, stay at home, watch TV.
Yeah.
That's all we ask of you.
When you think of that, we've got it pretty good.
Yeah. My mother was only she was 1937 born, so she was very young, but her school barely existed. Her school time, when they did get to school, at the top of the road, when they did get to school, it was underground because of what might happen, because it was it's a port town, you see, so we're the gateway to the Hook of Holland. So very heavy there. And very interestingly, and you will read about it possibly in my future books if you choose to do so, but I will say that the very last German POW stepped off of my hometown and went onto the boats.
Really?
From our local port, from the village where Kitty came. I've only just learnt that. I've only just learnt that, and there are a lot of local people who didn't know that.
Wow.
Yeah, and I've actually seen sort of footage of them going and leaving, and the very last person, the last German POW left here. So I've learned a lot of exciting things that I didn't know because nobody would speak about it.
It wasn't a topic for conversation.
And the kindergarten children who Kitty helped, that inspired her to go on further, they actually did come to our holiday camp, and that's where they stayed, and so the first place they saw was my hometown.
So the schools really were shortened in hours as well, like that.
Yes, very much so. The teachers went to war.
Oh, okay. Now that makes sense.
You were left, you know, and you know, if you had a very able headmaster, he was most probably home guard. He was fire duty. He was doing something. So yes, a lot of the teachers went to war, had to do things. Sometimes the schools were used for other things. So some children found that they were in Miss Whatever's back room having a maths lesson once a week and things like that. So lives were disrupted.
So then really all the schedules of life were thrown up in the air, and whatever landed, because when you put it that way, that teachers went to war and had other duties, what would that do to like mothers at home or working in the munitions factories or things like that? What would they do with their children? Because it's
grandparents. We all come in very handy, grandparents.
Yes, I will say you do.
Grandparents are called upon, or aunt, you know, aged aunts and uncles and those that could not go to war did their duty in the home.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, if you think a lot of women who went to work in the munitions factory, their husbands were on the front line probably.
Yeah. You know, and that's why I was kind of like, hey, you've shortened the school day. Now what do you do with the children? And I kind of, the reason it stuck out for me was literally because of COVID, because I'm like, well, we had such issues with parents going, but I have to go to work. So what
Yeah.
do I do with my children and if they can't be at school? And that's why I kind of thought, oh, interesting how we've
Mm.
evolved our schools to I have a friend who calls it child storage. And
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I'm like, but it's not
In
that off.
fairness, I mean, that's what it is.
There's there's that element to it, right? I mean, it is
Yeah.
education and they're, going through the paces so that they can become contributing
That is
adults.
how there was a campaign over here that's how the creche system
Yeah.
started in the because it was like, yes, you want us to do our duty. Now, come on, everybody, help. We
Everybody's
need
gotta help pitch in.
childcare. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. So
It's
yeah.
and I guess that kind of ties into the daylight savings question I have because I didn't realize that daylight savings stopped during the war. And was that just in
They
England or was that
well, they altered it here to give an extra 2 hours to help extend the working day. Um,
okay? Because and was that all over Europe or just England, you know? Oops.
and England had slightly different um, time zones and rulings, but it was very much that general idea.
Okay.
Um, I think some countries had their own ideas as well. But yes, it was basically to give a longer working time period. I think I've lost you.